Hey everybody, it's Papasan, VP of Learning at Keller Williams. So excited to wrap up our Grit Book Club. Thank you so much for joining us today. So excited, been looking forward to this day where we get Angela Duckworth herself to chat about her book and we get to ask her questions. I'll do some quick housekeeping before we dive in. If you're watching this on Facebook and you have a question you would like us to ask Angela, please put it in the comments. And if you would do us a favor, just put question in all caps so that our moderators can grab that and drop it into another place where I can see it. That'll help them spot your questions. You can do that at any time, and I'll try to remind you as we go. If you're watching on KW Connect, there should be a Slido screen available right there for you. If not, you can go to it at slido.com and just use the code GRITBookClub, all one word. And you can also put some questions in front of us that we will try to get to in the time that we have. All right, with all of that covered, I'll just say to kick this off, this is the second time I've gotten to interview Angela about her book. It is on my top 10 all time because it's one, extremely well written. It comes from a personal place that's very applicable to a lot of people. And she has done, a world-renowned amount of research on the topic. So her passion and her expertise shows through. If you're just here to listen, I hope that you'll go pick up her book and enjoy it and hopefully listen to at least a few chapters with your kids if you have them. It's very impactful for kids too, and that's a big part of her mission. So without further ado, Angela, Dr. Duckworth, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Angela, please, Angela. I only made people call me doctor for 1 week after I got my PhD, and then I got over it.
I have a colleague that has her PhD, and she only corrects people if someone refers to her as dear. And then she'll say, no, doctor.
Yeah, that's a good one. I think I'll pick that up.
Well, thanks for joining us. I've got a couple of questions that are just selfish for me. First off, if there's only one thing that someone takes away from your book, one lesson, one piece of information, what would you want them to know? And on top of that, what would you hope they would do with it?
I think the one thing, and maybe the core of why grit is so predictive of achievement, is that nothing worthwhile in this world can be done in a day, a week, or a month. It takes years, it takes decades. In some cases, by the way, it takes more than a lifetime. And you know that you're laying bricks that somebody else will have to follow you and lay the bricks, and eventually there may be a cathedral. And if that is the nature of human achievement, if that is the nature of life, then we need to think about motivation in terms of stamina. And that's really what I think of grit as, stamina in what you're doing with passion and perseverance, and not get so fixated on the rate at which things come easily to you. And that to me is what talent and intelligence are. So many people count themselves out of the game because they think, oh, but look, she learns faster than me. He picks it up more quickly. But it may not be that those two people are going to last as long as you do in this marathon.
Love it. So maybe just if it matters to you, don't quit. If we put that on a bumper sticker.
Yeah, can you fit that on a bumper sticker? Yeah, if it matters to you, I support that. We might want to wordsmith that, Jay. I know you're a writer too, so but sure, in spirit.
Yeah. Just trying to make sure I'm reflecting back what I'm hearing. Would you just really quickly? I know that, and I gave people permission, right? We have 75,000 real estate professionals that get a chance to listen to this. A lot of them are watching you live. And they're dealing with incredibly challenging times like a lot of us, right? So I'm going to give them some grace if they didn't make it through I love the book. I hope they'll do it. But if they didn't, give us a really quick formula for what is grit and why is it important? You hit on it with the purpose and perseverance, right? You kind of gave us some of the key ingredients, but just do the what is it and what are the key ingredients for us and why is it important?
So let me actually start with the simplest definition, which is grit is the combination of passion and perseverance for long-term goals. So not just perseverance for long-term goals, which is kind of what it sounds like, grit, John Wayne, that's only half of grit. The other half is passion, being I almost think it's like being married to like a vocation, or like that means like loyal to it and loving it. And as I said, it's about doing this not for short periods of time, but for long stretches of time. And to me, one of the most important things I tried to write about in the book is that, we don't find in our scientific research on grit that it goes hand in hand with talent. And in fact, for example, at West Point, where I've collected grit scores, I have a questionnaire called the Grit Scale on more than 10,000 cadets over more than a decade, actually. And when you follow these women and men across, their years of training, et cetera, you find that grit is the best predictor of sticking it through the hardest parts of training. And then also it predicts graduating 4 years later. And it's negatively correlated, actually, with your intelligence, your cognitive ability. So, if you feel like you're one of the people who, like me, wasn't the smartest person in her school, always could find classmates who were, things came more quickly to them, don't count yourself out, because it may be that you are the person who can pursue what you care about with passion and perseverance.
I love it. And so Talent is Overrated is a great book. I don't know if you've read that.
I love that book.
Oh, yeah. Fabulous book. And it's very instructive, especially for our kids, right? And hardship and struggle makes us stronger. And I remember, now I'm going off script because we're just now having a conversation.
We're off-roading. Okay, that's good.
When we wrote our book Shift many years ago, a lot of people started in this Facebook group for that book. We did a special edition. In the intro, Gary was talking about disadvantages often serve us. And he was using his son who has ADHD, and he was trying to explain to him, if you were an average person with average focus, you wouldn't have any incentive to be purposeful about getting focus. But people who have a disadvantage are incented to use a model, in our standpoint, a model, a framework to gain focus, which often catapults them past average and getting better results. So sometimes those disadvantages serve us, right?
Yeah, I have two things to say about that. One is, in a way, being gifted can be a curse, right? And it can give you a certain fragility. What happens to somebody who's like always number one and like always at the top? Well, one day they may not be. One day they might stumble and fall. One day they might royally screw up. And if you have no experience doing that, if you have no experience failing a test, not getting onto a team, being rejected, getting broken up with, then honestly, you're at a big disadvantage, I think, compared to somebody who has had experience to get better at that. So that's one thing. I agree in spirit with everything that you said, but I did want to add a second thing, which is, when Nietzsche said that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, I think you want to think about, when does it kill you, right? So when people have adversity without support, I think that's when it becomes toxic. That's when you feel, like you're marginalized and your confidence slides downhill. And I think that's why I don't want to overly romanticize, adversity. I want to say challenge and support are magical for human development. Extreme challenge without support can be terrible.
Oh, I love that, because that helps explain a lot. Because when we have a coach or we have a mentor that's guiding us through that and helping us learn from the failure so we can move forward, or pointing out that we're just getting started and we shouldn't feel like giving up yet, that is one of the number one ways that we get out of those places and don't get too discouraged.
Absolutely. There's a really, really short book. It would take, I think it's like on audio, I think it's like an hour, but I don't even know. Does that qualify as a book? It's more like a booklet. Okay. But it's by Michael Lewis, who of course wrote like Moneyball. Coach. And did you love it? Do you love it?
I loved that. It was an article. Yes. So that's recommended.
An article.
Yes. And they were smart enough to put it in book form. I mean, if you've read Make Your Bed, by
which I have.
Yep,
Bill McRaven.
Yep, and that was just a speech. It was a 15-minute speech that was very impactful, and someone was smart enough to package it in a book. So there's two more future reading recommendations for everybody in the group: Coach by Michael Lewis, and Make Your Bed by Admiral McRaven.
Correct. Yeah. Great.
But I'm not going to go into size matters jokes about the size of books. Okay. Okay. This is a question I actually got from one of my relatives. this idea of, like, you just kind of touched on it. When do we start abusing this idea of grit? Like, when should we just quit? Right.
Yeah.
I had a conversation with Seth Godin when he wrote the book Dip. He was one of our speakers, so we got to chat. And like, the big takeaway I took from that book is winners quit. Like, they know when to quit, and it's strategic quitting, right? So how do we know if we're like trying to put a square peg in a round hole and should just move on?
I think this is why just a moment ago when you proposed the bumper sticker, right? Like, if you really care about something, like, don't quit. I was like I hesitated for a half a second, and I think it's because of this. Here's where I think you shouldn't quit, right? Like, don't quit on your core values, right? And when life has given you enough experience that you know how it is with some specificity you are going to enact your core values. By the way, my husband's in real estate, but he's a developer. His like mission statement is like, make the world a better place through the built environment, right? And that is his way that he's decided to make the world a better place, the built environment, real estate development. Okay, I don't think he should quit on that. And, as we all know, the market's had ups and downs, and I think the place to quit, though, and to be flexible is on like very tactical, specific, plans that are enabling you to reach that long-term vision. So, for example, if you have a deal or a partner where it's not serving you and it's not serving your long-term mission, then I do think you should quit. So in sum, the bumper sticker has to be a little bigger than, the typical bumper sticker, because there is this, mistaken grit when you hold on to the wrong thing. And I think in general, it's usually when you're holding on to some kind of like very specific project or tactic. But I don't think in general we should give up on, core values or the abstract kind of like personal philosophy that we might have that guides what we do.
Okay, I love that. And this is another, like, I'm just like going to promote your platform. You've got a great podcast with Stephen Dubner called No Stupid Questions. And I think the last episode, y'all were talking about mission statements and debating them.
Yes,
right?
That's exactly right.
And,
yeah.
It's a big part of the One Thing community too, right? We call it purpose.
Yeah.
And what's the Carroll, the football coach, always compete?
Oh, Pete Carroll. Yeah. And he calls them personal philosophies. And by the way, I did read, as you know, I think I reached out to you, maybe Jay, like years ago. And I read, your book, One Thing. And it's exactly that, right? Like, have the reflection to commit to one thing, and it's not 20 things. It's one, and stay loyal to that. But, how you get there could be different than what you first think. And yeah, Pete Carroll's a huge fan of, keeping this one thing. He calls it his personal philosophy, and his is always compete.
I love that. But the point is, like you were just talking about, we quit maybe on a specific tactic. But if our values reflect our strategy for how we're going to live our life, always compete. Your mission is about empowering young people, right, with grit, right? I love that. That's broad. It is a little general. It still is a compass, but it means that if this tactic doesn't work, I'm committed to my, is it top level goal? I don't know all of your language. Top level goal, right?
I think of it as a top level goal. I mean, if you want to, like, since this is book club and we're getting a little deeper than you can just like in reading the pages, I would say a top level, mine is actually specifically use psychological science to help kids thrive. So that is my top level goal. All the other goals I have are kind of subservient to, they're like in service to that goal. But I think of when I actually only recently came to this understanding. I was having a conversation with Pete Carroll, and the sun broke through the clouds. When he talks about personal philosophy, like always compete, I think it's even a higher level than a top level goal. It's almost like the core values that motivate you, like, generosity or make the world a better place. Those are really abstract. And then you're like, be the best football coach or use psychological science. So it's that this is getting into nuances here, but in general, the higher you go up in a goal hierarchy, which is how I think human goals are organized. Like, you have these plans and they're low level goals. Like I have to
eat tacos for lunch, right? Is really low, but important.
But very important. You can say like, why do I need to eat tacos for lunch? Like, well, because I need to have energy. Why do you need to have energy? Because like, oh, I have to get these things done. When you keep going up in the goal hierarchy, you eventually get to a top level goal. And even beyond that, you might get to like core personal values.
Right. And for the record, and the people who followed me know this, like for me, I've got mine distilled into 3 words: family, impact, and abundance. And those become,
that's beautiful.
I use that, like I stole this from Greg McKeown and Brene Brown. And also, like I have about 3 sources, like my music, those are my influences. But Greg McKeown had his top 3 values, and it said, if it's not a 9 out of 10 on all 3, I should probably say no. That became like, I needed a tool. Like if I know kind of directionally what I want in life, how do I use that as a decision-making tool about what to say yes or no to?
So then let me ask you this. If your core values are, as you said, family, impact, and
abundance.
Abundance, right? Yeah, sorry. So then do you have like a specific like mission statement for how you're, given your, writing, communicating, like how you're going to make those 3 things like a reality in the world? Like, do you have like your equivalent to mine of use psychological science to help kids thrive? Is there something that's more like vocationally specific to your expertise or your interests?
Yeah, it's more related to our publishing operation, right? And I want to solve big problems in a way that inspire people and instruct them on what to do. And that's it's a little mealy mouth version of it, but that's fundamentally when we talk about what our books are supposed to do. And books that are all inspiration drive me a little crazy because I get all excited. I don't know what to do with it. Yeah. And books that are all instruction make me go to sleep. And then I don't do anything.
You don't get through the book.
Yes. And to me, I get excited, right, about, for me, having an impact is if we're trying to solve really big practical problems.
Yeah.
So
okay, so that does to me. I mean, we could draw it out if we had a piece of paper, but that makes total sense. And I do think that one of the things I learned since writing the book is that when it comes to like how am I going to like make these core personal values come like am I going to be in the publishing industry? Am I going to be a midwife? Like I feel like actually many people struggle more with that part, the passion part. Like, what is it? What do I do? How do I find a calling? More than the perseverance part, the work ethic, the resilience, et cetera. And I don't know, that in a way surprised me because it sounds like the perseverance part should be harder, but it's not, I don't think, for many people.
I love that, and I want to build on it. Let me ask you a question. Do you remember what the median grit score was for people at West Point that made it through?
I don't, but I think it was pretty high. 4 point, I don't know. Do you remember?
No. Is it like in the mid 40s or high? I just didn't know. I had this question when I was going through my notes.
I do know this. It is high. It's like in the 4 point, I'm just going to guess, like 4.2 or 3. I actually have the paper behind me so I could look it up, but it'd take too long. I do think this, though, West Point cadets rate themselves on pretty tough standards. So if you had a perfect scale where everybody was really like had the same mental model of what it really means to finish what you begin and work hard and stick with things, then those West Point cadets might have an even higher score. And in other words, they are self-reporting. So they're probably self-reporting according to pretty rigorous standards.
So I may have taken it wrong. We did a survey a long time ago, and I saw that when we scaled everybody, we had like 2,000 or 3,000 people take it in our industry.
Okay.
It went from 12 to 60 as the maximum score.
Oh, you have to divide by the number of items, though, because it's like you have to divide by.
Oh, so we didn't do it right. Okay. I was going to say, like, in real estate, our median was like a 44. Okay. And I don't know what to divide by on that. We just gave them the 12 point, and we were trying to see how that correlated to success.
Oh, if you gave them the 12-item scale, you should divide by 12. Okay. So now we have to sit here and divide 44 by 12, like on the fly.
Which I can't do in my head. We can all divide things by 3% in real estate, but we can't do by.
I think it's like high 3s, but south.
Okay. So that was the median. It wasn't like, I was surprised. Like it didn't, and one of the things we wondered if there was a selection process in real estate.
What? Like what surprised you? Was it like higher than you thought, lower than you thought? What did you think?
We didn't do the division, but our median was 44. Our top 10% of income earners was 46, and our bottom 10% was 42. So it was only 2 points different between. It wasn't a big spread. And the guys in our research team that actually do stuff that matter. They were just like, maybe there is part of the selection process. They had to have been in real estate for a year, right? Which is already a long time.
I've done a study on, another industry which is related, and the turnover rate is so high, as you know, in those very first months, and then, for that first year, that at least according to our other research, the less gritty individuals select
just get
out.
weeded out. Yeah.
So your research guys, I think, are onto something where, like, if you're still standing, you're pretty gritty. It's and also I'll just say this, like, this little scale, which I made up in my first year of graduate school, is not like the world's best questionnaire. So, maybe I should go back and make like the 2.0 version.
Maybe. My point was, I think that I've seen a lot of people that are, I think, a little bit inherently gritty, especially on the perseverance side, right? There's a lot of people that don't quit easily, but I also see a lot of people struggling to find their purpose. I literally was talking to someone who was number one in their whole region and number one in their kind of group. It was a role in our company called Productivity. They were one of the number one people in that role, but they had zero pleasure from that, but they were still driven to be number one.
So what motivates? What gets them up in the morning?
I didn't get to answer that question because it was a public, but I just wrote the word why on a big flip chart, and I just said, "This is your homework, right? Yeah. Are you trying to be successful for other people? There's probably something you haven't surfaced that is driving you that you could tap into, because people don't normally do that without something bigger, but they haven't figured out how to articulate it. Or they haven't figured out how to tap into it." So I was going to ask you, what advice, especially would you give to a young person, right? Because we often hear that advice better for our adult selves, but how can we maybe tap into our purpose with a little bit more clarity?
So I just taught a class called Grit Lab, and I had 60 young people. They were aged 18 to 22 years old. And, when we were both observing that, sometimes passion can be more of a struggle, more of a challenge than perseverance. Like, it's exactly what I found in the data on these students. So I had them all take a version of the grit scale on the very first day of class, and their perseverance scores were higher than their passion scores. And so what we did in that class, I think, is good advice, which is it begins with interest, right? Like, I have never studied a super achiever who isn't curious about what they do. And we're not equally interested in everything. Like, sci professor, right? Like, it's just over there. The building's right there. I would be terrible. I wouldn't get tenure. I'm so not interested. But I love psychology. So interest is a huge driver. I think it's the seed of passion. You mentioned the word purpose. Here's the way I would use that word. And I think it dovetails with kind of intrinsic curiosity and interest. I think of purpose as when you're doing something that really aligns with your core values, like who you want to be at your best. For me, it's like being a generous person, doing something with excellence. So when you take an interest, like psychology, and then you take a core value or a sort of a moral that you hold to be important, like help people, you put them together, you can get passion. And I think young people do need some help in discovering and developing their interests. How do you do that? Go have curiosity conversations with people that you might want to be when you grow up, et cetera. They do need some structured opportunities to reflect on their values. And I hope that accelerates the process. But here's what I told my undergraduates on the last day of class. I was like, look, I hope that I can help you, reading books, et cetera, accelerate a little bit this maturation process. But I don't think it can be so shortcut that you can do it in 2 weeks, it takes years generally for people to, I think, come to something where they would say, like, now I would call this a calling.
Yeah. And okay, so I'm going to follow up on that. Our advice usually is do the homework, journal, whatever you have to do, talk to people who know you. What do you think drives me? There are people who might see us better than we see ourselves. Keep a journal, do something to kind of engage on this regularly. And then when you think you've got it, date it for a while. Like, don't rush out to the tattoo parlor right away, right? Date it for a while, because a lot of times we discover that we're in the ballpark, but it takes some going down that path to kind of refine things.
100%. And I love the metaphor of dating, because I do think in a way, when you reach a certain point, it is like getting married, right? And there's this longer term commitment, not to say that there might not be a divorce at some point, but there is a kind of commitment. But before marriage comes dating, right? And I think when you think of that way, you can flirt with something, right? Like you can try it out, and then you don't have to feel so bad if you thought you wanted to, do something like become a landscaper, and then like turns out after a couple of weeks that, you hate being outside and you have terrible allergies. So like, you switch. But I do think if you are dating with intention, when I was dating, and I dated a lot of guys, I will tell you, I remember that when I was like with these guys, I would say to them like, well, we're not going to get married, so let's break up. In other words, I was dating with intention. I was like, and I cycled through them pretty quickly, but I do think it's the same process for figuring out your work, right? Like let me date you, but I'm not just dating you as an end in itself. I'm trying to figure out if we're getting married.
I love it. And in the dating process, I'll keep that metaphor. You can't get engaged just through working with someone in a dating app, right? You actually have to go and spend time with them. And
100%.
I actually see a lot of people, and I really struggle with this at young people. They'll go get a degree. Like I talked to someone who had gotten a degree and they studied to become a massage therapist, only after the fact to realize they just didn't like touching people's feet and stuff like that. And I'm like, go do an internship, right? If you would tell a young person to go do it. So if you're out there and you're listening to this and you're an agent and you think that maybe you want to get into a leadership role, how could you do an internship? Could you volunteer on the board of a charity and take a leadership role? Can you do things in your side time to date those other interests and see if they really are more of an interest than just an idea in your head?
The ability of your average human being to predict with accuracy what they will really like and like for a while versus, hey, this is not a good fit, is almost zero, honestly. Like there is this world-class Emmy award-winning violist named Roberto Diaz, and he ended up playing the viola, of course. That's what he got his Grammy, sorry, not Emmy, a Grammy. But when he was young, his parents were violinists. And so, of course, he started off playing the violin. And, he was very good. He liked it, but, didn't love it. One day he picks up the viola, which is, for those of you who don't know, just like a violin, but like a little bigger, right? And he fell in love. And I was like, Roberto, how is that possible? They're the same instrument practically. He's like, oh, no, one has a more alto sound. Anyway, then he said a lot of things I don't understand. You can't predict these things. Who could predict that the viola was going to be a love for his life, and the violin just 15% smaller wouldn't? So you have to sample. You have to sample in 3 dimensions. You have to really do it, and it's not abstract, and it's not all journal writing. I completely agree.
Cool. I love it. All right. So before we beat up the dating metaphor for the entire thing, and this becomes a whole conceit around that, it is fun. What's one thing that you kind of hinted at this? Like, if you could go back and rewrite Grit today, what's one thing that you would subtract and one thing that you would add?
Okay. Well, here's one thing I would add, or I would like boldface, highlight, put it all on like some big figure or drawing. I don't think Grit means that you don't care about structural opportunity, equality. Right now in this country, there are conversations about racial injustice, systemic inequality. And I think those conversations, somebody asked me like, oh, well, you probably don't care about those things because you think people should be gritty and pull themselves up by their bootstraps. But I like to say back to them, and I guess I should have said it louder in my book, that if you care about people being their best and reaching their potential and achieving their dreams, then you have to care more, not less, about support systems, about opportunity, about feeling like you have a place in society. So I guess I didn't do a good enough job with that, given some of the critiques I've had, and I would put that in. In terms of things that I would take out, I'm not sure I would take much out. I do think that, as a scientist, like I had to take out a lot of the like statistics and the details. But if you ask me, should I really put it in? I'm like, I don't know. Like what you said, Jay, you don't finish every book you read. So anyway, I have a little ambivalence about that.
That's cool. Thanks for that insight. That's just me. Like I get asked that question. I thought, maybe I'll ask you. Maybe there's something really big that you've learned since, right?
Yeah.
Well, I think you just hit it. My friend Mary asked me if hardship builds grit, is there a tipping point? And I think this is what we talked about earlier, where hardship without support can get to that tipping point faster, and it's not necessarily beneficial.
I think that's right. And by the way, scientists have a term for when you are beyond your tipping point for stress, and it is called allostatic load. And actually, the neuroscientist who discovered that the brain and the body have a kind of very productive and adaptive short-term response to stress, right? Like when your heart rate goes up and, your blood is coursing and the adrenaline's flowing and the cortisol and all that, in the short term, that can be very helpful. It's like you're energized, you can sometimes be better focused, et cetera. There is a tipping point where it is too much and too long. And scientists call this allostatic load, where the body and the mind's response is no longer adaptive and can be, really detrimental. And so that is why, all of us who are fortunate, and I think if you're listening and watching, you are fortunate, I'm sure, in many ways, we all have responsibility also to do something for, especially kids, I think, who are not growing up with, the kinds of privileges and abundance that, some of us have enjoyed.
Love it. And if we get to that, I did ask you, people have a question. We talked about some of the race right now. That's a big question a lot of us have. We may get to that because we do have a behavioral scientist. It's not your expertise, but if someone fields a question, they can put it in the Slido for us or in the comments. I've got a couple more questions. We're getting towards the end of our time, and then I want to purposefully look at some of the questions we have from the audience, but I can do some rapid fire. So my trainer is Finnish. And so you got a mask, right? How did you find out about sisu? How did you find out about sisu? She wants to know, that's the Finnish word kind of for grit, right?
Yeah, I think your trainer gave you a face mask, right, that says sisu, and then I admired it. Right, you must have sent me a photo, and then sure enough, you sent them to me, and I have proudly worn them. They're in the wash, and that's why I don't have mine. I have this much less cool looking mask today. Sisu is a Finnish word that doesn't have a direct translation into the English language, but probably grit is the closest. And the literal translation is insides, like your intestines. And the idea in Finnish culture is that there is a fortitude, an internal fortitude that you bring to bear when times are really tough. And the Finns believe that nobody has it except for them. So when I learned about this from my Finnish graduate student, I was intrigued. She studied it with me for a year. And I will say that, many teams will have words that they use, and I don't care if it's grit or sisu or whatever, but I think the power of language is really important. And if there is a word that captures your identity, like what you're all about and what makes your team, your family, your culture different, I really think it's a wonderful thing and should be celebrated.
I love that. Which my mind, the writer goes down, we talk about intestinal fortitude. How did that even become a phrase? Is that because to survive, maybe you had to eat really bad food? What is that?
I don't know. But it is interesting because so many of the metaphors people use, like heart, or guts, it's where does that come from and why? I don't
to
have
the age of bodily humors or something, and they thought that those had mystical qualities. Who knows? My friend Kimberly asked a similar question. If you hadn't called the book Grit, what would you have called it? Was there ever any debate for you?
Yeah, so with my doctoral advisor at the time, Marty Seligman,
who's amazing, by the way. I mean, what a great mentor to have.
He is amazing and very gritty. And Marty, who loves words as much as you or I do, Jay, wouldn't even keep talking to me about this idea that I was coming up with in graduate school until I had a good name for it, which I kind of thought at the time was incredibly superficial or whatever. But now I understand that he understood the power of words and the power of language. So I had a list for him, right? And I guess you could say these would have been alternatives for the book title, like stamina, pluck, endurance. And when I was reading him this list of words and, sort of going down the list, and then I got to grit, and he was like, what? And I was like, grit, like True Grit, like John Wayne, True Grit. And he was like, stick with that.
I liked pluck too. That would have been a good second choice. It's got a good ring to it, but
it does, but then it rhymes with other things. So, but then so does grit. So, anyway, so yeah.
Grit's perfect.
The road not taken.
This is, you don't have to reveal it. I know, given your mission and how you want to help young people, have you ever considered creating a version of your book just for teens or young people?
Okay, secret. Never told anybody this. I wrote one, and it was because my publisher said, you should write one. And I didn't really write one. I took mine, and then I like cut out a bunch of stuff, and then I tried to edit it a little bit, and then I shoved it, across the desk to my publisher, and my editor like looked at it, Rick Horgan, and he was like, this is good, but it's not great. I don't think you want to publish something that's good and not great. And I said, you're absolutely right. So that is why there isn't a young adult version, because I don't have a maybe not yet. You know what I have been thinking lately? I think like kids' books are my favorite books, like children's books. Like they're just better, and they have pictures, and they don't take forever to read, and they get right to the point, a lot of action. So I don't know, maybe someday. But doing science is kind of like sort of a full-time job. So I think I might, I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to write another book.
If this is your only contribution to our bookshelves, I think you can retire happy. That's good. But I know my friend Heidi and a lot of people share your passion and sharing this, but you're also teaching classes. And so there's other ways that you could reach children. And I'll just say this, children's books are really hard to write.
Have you written one?
No, but I've been in publishing long enough. And at HarperCollins, almost all of our books were paid for by the Children's List. And I had a friend that worked there. Just think about this. What's harder to do? Deliver a 15-minute speech or a 50-minute speech?
Oh, well, Mark Twain gave us the answer to that one, right? I would write you a short letter, but I didn't have time, so I wrote you a long one. So yeah, okay, I'm probably grass is always greener, like, oh, those children's books look delightful. But you're exactly right. And here's how I'm really trying to reach parents and teachers, and I'm trying not to charge for it. So I have a nonprofit. It's called Character Lab, and honestly, I put everything I know about how children thrive there, and it's free. It's funded by the Gates Foundation and the Bezos family and lots of other people who have lots of money. And so if parents and teachers want grit for free, or research on gratitude, curiosity, humility, etc., they can go to characterlab.org.
Love it. And thank you for giving us the .org. I actually subscribed to your newsletter on that. And
I know, it makes me so happy.
Well, I subscribe to a few things, right? There's the Farnham Street blog. There's a few like intellectual things that I know that it will always feed me good stuff. But I learned something from almost all of your letters, and I've even copied and used them in my own newsletter. So it's good stuff. I would encourage people. When I get
because I get yours newsletter, right? Which, by the way, I love because it's so personal and it's warm, and then you have these like random things in there, which I especially love. But I like sometimes I'll see what we put into our little thing, and I'm like, yay, we're having an impact. So it makes me happy.
You're having an impact. So I'm going to go to a couple of the questions we have here before we wrap it up. Randall asked, what interesting ways, how did the stories and subjects that have ended up in your research in your book, how did they reveal themselves to you?
Okay, two ways. One is if they were like super high achievers, like I, found them, tracked them down, won the Nobel Prize, multiple time gold medalists, or I would ask, for example, like there's a chef in my book named Mark Vetri, and how did I find him? Like I asked the leading food critic in Philadelphia, like who's the best and grittiest chef, and so that was one way. And the second way is that when I started writing this book, all of my examples were like really boring ones from like being the life of a college professor, and my editor was like, this is really boring. So I'm going to help you find some like less boring examples to illustrate all the things. Anyway, so either I studied them because they were world-class achievers and I could document that, or my very resourceful editor found some people too.
That's great. I love it. And editors tend to have a good nose for what will work too, which is nice to have on your team. I have the world's best editor. I just have to say, I love Rick Horgan. It's great. Awesome. Here's another one from Mary. Is ego in any way impacting grit? And she put it, one of the things that we talk about in Bold and in some of other courses is people want to look good and feel good. And this idea, and this is almost like avoiding failure, right? I'm going to keep going because there's that ego. Is it correlated at all? Is that tied up in there?
Yeah, when you said ego, I was like, I wonder how she means it, right? Because, in one sense, ego is a positive thing. If you mean like confidence, right? And if you mean specifically the confidence that you can learn and that you can, eventually do something, not just that you're like a great person, full stop. Okay, that kind of ego, thumbs up. But I think many of us mean ego, like the ego is the obstacle, kind of the Ryan Holiday,
Yeah.
ego getting in the way, always trying to protect your ego and worrying about your ego. So I think grit actually comes from the first kind of ego, the kind of like the quiet confidence that like you will eventually persevere, and not that you're the perfect person, not even that you're the best person, but that you think that you can really learn and grow. It's very related to growth mindset. That kind of ego is great. And actually, when I think about why I've been successful, I do think it's because I have a certain kind of confidence that, not that I know everything, not that but that, if I hang in there long enough, like I'm going to get the hang of this. What I think is very detrimental to grit, to success, to risk-taking is the kind of ego that it's like a big glass bubble is the image that comes to mind. It's large, it's incredibly fragile. You have to like make sure that nothing punctures it. And that kind of ego is actually, of course, part of all of our lives. And I think when we get that spidey sense that, we're not going to say or do something because we want to protect our big glass fragile ego, that's where you have to say like, oh, I'm going to ignore that voice for now and, have my other kind of ego come out and play.
Love it. All right. Love it. And that was a tough question. I got one more for you. I keep wanting to ask you follow-up questions because I just nerd out on this stuff. But James Shaw is one of the people who built this group for us. He has a parenting podcast. It's a big deal to him. And he and I connected over this book because one of my number one takeaways we implemented, right, was parenting for grit and the hard thing rule. And he wanted to know if you had any advice. And I'll just say this, to credit you, impact, my son is now a rower.
What?
And so I feel like we got something right because I don't know that there's a sport that's grittier than rowing.
I don't think there is. And Bill McNabb, who became the CEO of Vanguard, would say that everything he learned about grit, he learned rowing. And he has lots of stories about being on the second boat and moving, anyway, all that stuff. So, his question is, how do we balance being loving and respectful and also kind of demanding and driving? Like, you got to have this hard thing. Like, how do you find that balance as a parent? It is so hard. So first, for all those parents out there, I am like a 7 out of 10 parent. I mean, I'm like not a 10 out of 10 parent, but I know what 10 out of 10 parents are supposed to do. So I'll share. Like, it is so hard, and you never quite get it right. You're always calibrating. Every day is a new day, and I think that this balance, and maybe I'll use a different word. It's not just balance between being supportive and demanding. It's this combination of being very supportive and very demanding. Like, how do we get that right? I think there's no easy answer, but I will say this. What it means to be demanding is to ask your kids to do things they can't yet comfortably do. If every day of their life they're doing what they can comfortably do, they're not growing, right? So that's what demanding means. So, they're a little scared to go to that camp, but they're going to go anyway. Like, this course is a little too hard, but they're taking it anyway. So that's demanding. On supportive, I think that comes very intuitively to many parents, but it really does mean being warm and being autonomy granting. And this is the part of supportive which a lot of parents struggle a little more with, which is when your kid has a choice to make, you're letting them make it as opposed to you're making it. Honestly, you probably would make, in some cases, better choices because you're older and you have more experience. But one of the tricks of being a supportive parent is allowing your kid to take as much responsibility and autonomy in their choices as possible. And I will just say that,
within safety margins, right?
Yes, with safety. I mean, and you have to have some boundary. But like many parents struggle with that because I calculate in my head what the right thing to do is, and then I'm like, you should do that. And that's really not good for kids growing up to be, their own independent people.
You were sharing this with me before we started. Your two kids are 17-ish, 18, and they wanted to go participate in some of these marches. And you as a parent are balancing letting them make that choice and also trying to keep them safe. Are you going to wear a mask? Are you going to social distance? Right? You want them to experience that. Yeah, it's tough.
And we let them go. Just that was the end of, in case you're wondering what happened, we like triple masked them. I was like, hopefully they, I guess they breathed, but and then, we scolded them. Then we immediately got them COVID tested and, we quarantined them until but I also thought look, my kids grew up, thank God, to care about social justice and to care about people who, deserve to be seen and heard. And so it was a tough decision, but I think it was the right one.
Love it. Hey, Angela, we've taken a lot of your time. Thank you so much for pouring into us. And thank you for what you're doing for the world. You're really making a big contribution. You're helping us value something that matters, right? And look for it and foster it in the people that matter to us. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Jay, I'm a super fan of yours. So I hope that we get to talk again.
Yes, I can't wait till the next time. Thanks, everybody. Go out and buy our book. Go to thecharacterlab.org. Go to your favorite podcast. Go download No Stupid Questions. There's lots and lots of ways we can continue learning from Ms. Duckworth. See y'all later.
Bye, Jay.